So, J.K. Rowling, Margaret Atwood and Salman Rushdie are among 150 leading authors, academics and thinkers who this week signed an open letter condemning what they called an intolerance of opposing views and a vogue for public shaming and ostracism.
The letter read that the free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted. Some of the signatories have had work banned in certain countries, while others have been attacked online after making comments that have caused offence. So, are we too intolerant of views we find offensive, or is it right to silence views we find unacceptable? Well, here to discuss these issues are Director of the Free Speech Union, Inaya Folarin, model and activist Kenny Ethan Jones, journalist and presenter Shante Joseph, and comedian and podcaster Konstantin Kisin. Good morning to you all. Inaya, aren't the people who signed this letter this week just being a bit sensitive themselves? In a way, they want to cancel the people who criticise them.
Absolutely not. So cancel culture is not about criticism. You know, in a democracy, free speech includes criticism, harsh criticism, debate, discussion, all of those things are welcome. But cancel culture is something very specific. It is a public vilification campaign. It is a dehumanizing process which seeks to completely destroy somebody's livelihood, to exclude them from public life and to completely disregard often decades of contribution that they've made. And
when you say cancel culture, what exactly do you mean? What does it involve? What sort of things?
So for example, we've already talked about people in positions of power and authority, but it is disproportionately actually ordinary people and people, within the community that are affected by this. I mean, very recently, a gentleman called Nick Buckley, who founded an antisocial behaviour charity, has got an MBE, done decades worth of important community organising and work, has been removed for criticising Black Lives Matter. This is what happens. Ordinary people from all kinds of backgrounds are not allowed to express even disagreeable political opinion, anything that doesn't veer from the dominant orthodoxy of the time. And that is completely acceptable for a lot of people to entirely remove their livelihood, drag their name through the mud and exclude them from public life. That is unacceptable in a free and open democratic society. Free speech is so we can negotiate ideological and intellectual diversity. We need this for a free and open democratic society.
Kenny, how do you feel about this? I mean, isn't I right that even though you don't agree with the views of some of these people, the best way to take on ideas is to debate and persuade, not by silencing people and pretending they don't exist?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there needs to be kind of room to discuss these sort of things. But the way that it's being discussed now, it's not with care. It's harming people. It's hurting people who are home to marginalised groups. So it's not the way forward.
No.
Konstantin, you've been Jewish Comedian of the Year. The Jewish community can be at the tough end of hate speech. Tackling this and even cancelling it is the right thing to do, isn't it, when people speak out in an offensive way?
But this isn't about hate speech, and I think that's a very important thing for people to realize. I'm glad Inaya brought up the case of Nick Buckley, because I was going to bring that up. But actually, as we were on air, I got a message on Twitter from somebody who works on this very program who said, I'm glad to see you on the show because I am terrified to say what I think at work. And what Inaya was really talking about, and I think she's absolutely right, it's not about cancelling people for individual acts of hate speech. What it really is about is creating an atmosphere of fear, a climate of fear where people fear speaking their mind, when people are afraid for their job. And I can give you plenty of examples in this country and in America. I mean, we had a radio presenter who was removed from his show for denying the idea of white privilege.
We don't really have time for examples, unfortunately, though I know there
they're
are
very
many.
important examples because I'm talking about ordinary people who get removed from their workplaces. We're not talking about celebrities.
Konstantin, we want to talk about the principle, and we have had some examples, and we want to focus on the debate.
Shante, are we in danger of trying people in a court of public opinion without any space for ambiguity or context?
I mean, honestly, not really. I think when we look at the way that we view and we do justice in this country, and we look at the way it continuously veils people who are marginalized, of course, people are using this moment when they finally have kind of social capital and a voice and a platform to call out things that they deem as problematic. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And as long as we've had pop culture, we've had cancel culture, and, before maybe this was quite a misogynistic culture where it was getting at women who had affairs or women who got plastic surgery, whatever, but it's slowly kind of evolved into people actually seeing the ways in which the people that they look up to can have harmful and problematic views, and they're taking control of that, and they're saying, actually, we need to be a bit more careful when we're talking about certain issues or we're addressing certain topics, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Inaya, you're shaking your head at that. What do you...
No one is safer. No one is more engaged within society for people to actually be silenced and vilified. This does nothing to create a cohesive, positive, constructive discourse. What this does is build resentment, build anxiety, increases self-censorship. This is not a recipe.
No, it doesn't.
Let's put that back to Shantae. How would you respond?
I think what we need to understand is that the whole reason why we're having this conversation right now is because somebody like J.K. Rowling thinks it is acceptable to be transphobic online and face zero repercussions for those actions. People who belong to those identities, I haven't finished talking yet.
Let
People
Shantae
who belong
finish.
to those identities are saying enough is enough, and we are actively disinvesting from you as an individual. Nobody is doing anything bad to her. People are unfollowing her. People are no longer buying her books. And you are within your rights to do that. If you do something that is problematic, or you say something that negatively affects an already harmed group, and then you face repercussions for that, unfortunately, that's your business.
Okay,
and you
Shantae,
can't
let's get Inaya's response, and Shantae. Inaya, briefly, just respond to that.
Again, this is just a complete non-starter. We're not talking about criticism. We're talking about people receiving death threats, people being excluded from public life. And we already gave examples of ordinary people just expressing reasonable political opinion. Well, J.K. Rowling is...
Reasonable political opinion does not mean that you go after people who are already marginalised.
Let's bring someone else in on this.
So, Kenny... some people say the time for talking is past and just talking has got us nowhere. Is this the kind of internet revolution? Is it a kind of violent reshaping of the public imagination, do you think? Or is it just sinister?
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Oh, yeah, I don't really understand what I mean either.
Sorry.
I suppose, let me say differently. Is this just a way that the status quo is protected by the people in power saying, you can't criticise us, you're behaving badly. If you pull our statues down, we're not going to listen to you until you behave well, until you eat your Brussels sprouts. Is this just a way of defending the status quo?
All this letter is doing is protecting privileged people.
Yeah.
And people in power and people with money. That is all that's happening right now. It's not helping marginalized groups and people that are actually on the back end and people that are suffering from these things that people are saying like J.K. Rowling. That's what's happening here.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna. People are getting in touch at home. I'm gonna just go through some messages. Inaya, in 1 minute, I'm gonna go through some of the messages that people are sending in. So Peter has got in touch. He says society is getting so wrapped up in itself that anything that anyone disagrees with outside the fashionable norm is considered offensive. If I choose not to take the knee in support of Black Lives Matter, does that automatically make me a racist? Mike says if your opinion disenfranchises people or demeans them or denies their existence, that's not acceptable. People should be able to voice opinion, but when does that voiced opinion motivate people to violence? And Leanne adds, I respect their willingness to push back on cancel culture and stand up for freedom of speech. We should all have the freedom to develop our own opinions, and we should teach our children how to debate. Well, Kenny, I just want to go back to you. People watching, some of them, the idea of gender identity is going to be a very new issue and difficult to understand. How can you increase understanding if people feel worried about asking questions about it because they will be labelled as transphobic, say, for example?
I think, first of all, it's important to do your own research. Like me being a trans activist, it's not about me spending every day kind of like informing people on, on trans issues. It's like go out there, do your research first and then come back with, care in the conversation and in the questions that you ask me, basically.
Constantine, are there any viewpoints you think should be silenced?
Well, let me just come back on this because we're talking about the principle and you set up the discussion by saying that this is about us preventing people from being offensive and saying things that are a minority opinion. Actually, the J.K. Rowling example is a perfect example of somewhere where the vast majority of the public agree with J.K. Rowling about this issue. So what this is about a vocal minority of people who shut down the opinions of the majority. And this is the position that we're now in. Now, of course, there are some things that we wouldn't want people saying live on air. We wouldn't want people inciting violence, etc. But apart from that, we should be living in a society where we're free to discuss these things. And one of the problems with this cancel culture is what it's really about is we no longer care about the truth. We care about people's feelings a lot more than about the truth. And so the people who advance these very misleading and sometimes dishonest ideas upon the society, they use cancel culture to prevent others from challenging the things that they're peddling that are not true. And that's why this has to be resisted, because at the end of the day, we all have to be able to have a conversation about what is true and what isn't.
Well, I suppose as an advocate for the Down syndrome community, that hasn't been my experience. My experience has been the majority think they know and tell us how things are. But Shante,
but I wasn't saying that about the Down syndrome issue. I was talking about the issue of transgenderism.
I'm just saying that it also applies there. Shante, how do we... what is the place for forgiveness in society? I mean, these are emotive issues for people who are hurt by this speech. How do we move...
I think it's a much broader issue. Like I was speaking about before, when we look at justice, as a society, we've kind of always been taught to see that, there is no real de-escalation. We go straight to, a police force. We go straight to a judicial system that continuously lets people down. It's about re-educating society about how we see and do justice, how we veer away from vengeance and we go towards rehabilitation. Do you know what I mean? So that's why you may have a culture that seeks to tear people down, because it's all that people have ever known. And it's about people also being accountable. Don't double down on something if you said something incorrect. Have the confidence and have the self-awareness to say, actually, do you know what, maybe I did something wrong and I have to be educated about it. I have a huge platform. I've said stuff that's problematic. I've been called out about it, and I've had to be like, do you know what, guys, I apologize. Now I've done my research. I understand that what I said maybe didn't come across correctly, and I will seek to do better in the future. And it's very easy, and people can be forgiven. But if you double down and you seek to constantly criticize people, of course you're not going to be in good favor. So what do you expect? Do you know what I mean?
Inaya, do we live in an unforgiving society?
Absolutely. I mean, the contradictions in what was last said is astonishing. We've had support for cancel culture and now saying that we need to re-understand, how to do justice. At the end of the day, trans people, black people, women, we don't all think the same. Many trans people agreed with J.K. Rowling, and this attempt to homogenize all so-called marginalized people as victims that are uniquely sensitive to offensive ideas is completely ridiculous. Actually, we need to have a free and open environment to engage in the vast range of experiences and diversities of ideas that we have in our society. And free speech is the way to do that, not by silencing, not by vilifying people, and not by dehumanizing people.
Kenny, how can we... you're sort of shaking your head there, Kenny. What would you say? How do you respond? You look exasperated.
I'm sorry. J.K. Rowling is dehumanizing trans people. How does that make sense, please? Why can she turn around and say what she wants to say, and trans people should be silent and should be hurt? Trans people are not agreeing with what J.K. Rowling is saying. That's not what happened.
There are lots of trans people who do agree with what J.K. Rowling is saying. And by the way, we need to get back to this idea that that you introduced this conversation with, that people are being hurt by speech. Let's remember what hurts people. We're talking about violence. Yes, that can hurt people, but words are just words, and we need to understand that.
But Constantine, words lead to other things, and we know that.
Well, what's your evidence for saying that?
Well,
because there's been plenty of research on that shows otherwise. So you just made an assertion there. What's your evidence? No, hold on. Can we please get an answer on this question? What is the evidence?
Shante, let me finish.
What is the evidence for the idea that words lead to actions? Can you please explain that?
From the Down syndrome community, I'd say that if you always refer to a Down syndrome pregnancy as a risk, that's going to make someone think it's a bad thing, and it's going to guide them towards maybe a choice of termination. For example, that'd be just one of many examples.
Yeah,
and what's your evidence for that?
And racist actions in this country, they will maybe start with lots of people, a certain language, a certain way of people talking.
So you don't have any evidence, it's just your opinion?
Well,
but they just gave evidence. How can you be a comedian?
That's not evidence, that's anecdotal.
Inaya,
let's not get bogged down on that.
Inaya, what would your ideal outcome be, very quickly?
I think that we have a very low view of human beings if we think we're just passive recipients of words and just, words to spark us into actions. Actually, that is not the case. Most people are compass mentis human beings that can distinguish between, ridiculous ideas and intellectual ideas. And we do that by allowing people to engage in conversation, to be able to learn and make mistakes and grow, not by just, using one thing that they've said that is offensive to dominant sensibilities right now.
Which
and using
is
that
what we've done now. We're out of time, and I thank you all so much for joining us on what is a very difficult subject.